Hello. Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome, Trish. Great to see you. Early-ish in Washington State. Some of you may have noticed, Some of you may have noticed that the time is different on the live streams after the time changed in the US, and that is because my time does not change here in Mexico. So yeah, I'm now in a different time zone because I don't change with you. So, good morning, Deirdre. Welcome. Donna, good morning. Robina from Texas. Awesome. I was born in Ohio, and I also spent some of my childhood in Texas. So there you go. I'm excited to be here with everybody today. We will give a few minutes for people to filter in and join in, and so we'll just set the energy for our space today. So Donna, great that this time is better for you. I mean, for me, in my work, and for those who don't know, I'm a spiritual life coach and Reiki master teacher, and I work with clients all over the world, so it's part of my job to figure out time zones. And it's actually a strength of mine, which is good. I've been doing this over 5 years, so try and keep on top of the time zone changes. Welcome, Nancy. Good morning. So wonderful to be here with everybody today. March 15th. We are getting close to a quarter of the year over. Doesn't it seem like a blink of an eye? We were, it was December 31st and about to be 2026 and New Year's resolutions and a fresh new year and the Chinese New Year, and here we are in the Ides of March. So, life is passing us by. I was listening to this physicist talk on YouTube, and it was talking about the nature of time and if it exists, and it's all very compelling and good to think about because, and I talked about this in our last live stream, we really oriented to what's actually going on in this moment as far as, the happenings in the universe, infinitely bigger and infinitely smaller. We felt into the images and energy of, the suns being born and dying and galaxies and planets and, all of those things that are happening right now, as well as the things that are occurring on the planet in this moment. We're turning around the star called the sun. There's weather happening. There's people being born and dying every second. So it's really good to orient into that. And so this this talk was about about time. I'm not a university level physicist, so I won't try and explain, but it was talking about when you're 5 years old, a year is like whatever, 20% of your life, right? And how many of you can relate to, thinking back earlier in your life, how different time was, the passage of time, how a year felt like forever. And the older we get, the more time we've accumulated in our memory and in our experience. And so now, I know for me, years feel like months. So it's good just to orient into this idea. We humans are the only beings on the planet that are aware of our own death, that we have one. Animals don't have that awareness. So we have that gift, and yet of course we live as though we're going to live forever, most of us. So it's a very powerful spiritual practice to orient into the reality, not as something macabre, but to help us to reduce our suffering, right? So, it's a pause moment here, middle of March. How's your 2026 been so far? In this year, we've got, 8.5 months remaining. What do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? What do you want to accomplish? Or what do you want to stop doing? So for our live stream today, we're going to be talking about anxious attachment in relationships. So this might be something for some of you that you want to change, a pattern you want to change. Now, I want to start out talking about this by asking, who all here has knowledge of attachment theory, or just even knows what it means, or who all is like, I don't even know what anxious attachment means, what are you talking about? So if somebody will be brave enough to share in the comments, because I'd like to get a read of the audience, just to orient, because there's so many of us here. We have all different sorts of wisdom and knowledge. Deirdre has some knowledge of it. I would say I have some, and it's growing. Robina's heard it a lot. Yeah, it's become a thing, which is good, just like PTSD, we used to call it post-traumatic stress syndrome, in the 90s or maybe early 2000s. But now, PTSD, CPTSD, most all of us know what it is, and it's good. It's good to have the awareness and the knowledge so we can have understanding of our patterns, so that we can make changes and the patterns don't run our lives anymore, and that we can heal. Hi, Lynn, you've had some training. Awesome. Well, please feel free to correct me, to bring your knowledge and wisdom here if you would like. Of course, you don't have to. So Donna, possibly anxious. Trish, anxious attachment. So I would say generally for many people here in our Insight Timer community, we are going to lean anxiously attached. Because kind of the what's needed for people to have this is being emotionally perceptive, which we could also say being empathic, being highly sensitive, the nature of that is having a wonderful level of awareness where we perceive things and that others might not. So it would make sense that many of us would have more anxious attachment. So good morning, Karen. Great to see you. So before we dive any further into that, I want to clarify something. So those of you that have heard of anxious attachment likely have heard of it in the context of romantic relationships, which is how it's most popular these days right now, and it's not exclusive to that. So if you're here and it doesn't apply romantically for you, there's still something here for you, because it's an emotional pattern that can show up in work and friendships, even in spiritual communities. So I just want to share that. Totally, Trish. Who else can relate to dating an avoidant that fed off of your anxious attachment style besides me? So attachment theory is this idea that was created from research done by some people. And it talks about how when we are children, those experiences shape our whole lives, which we talk a lot about in here, and that's no surprise. But how we form attachments in childhood to our primary caretakers will influence our adult relationships, connections, and patterns. So if you grew up in an unsafe household, then likely you have attachment issues because there was not safety and security. So children learn early, is connection safe? So I want you all to think about your primary caregivers, if they were parents or grandparents or otherwise. Was the connection safe? Were your caregivers emotionally available or even physically available? And for some, there might have been physical availability but not emotionally. Some might have been totally absent, or some a mix. So children, we are totally helpless when we're born into this world, and our caregivers are God, right? Like, we know nothing else. We have no concept. And so we, like, physiologically, biologically, instinctually attach with, usually it's mother. And so we learn, does it feel safe? Or is mother sometimes warm and sometimes cold? And again, it could be different caregivers depending on your upbringing. So there's something I want to bring up here that can fit into this as well, which is called intermittent reinforcement. So how many of you have heard of intermittent reinforcement or not heard of it? I'm sorry, Trish, that the person you were with left you heartbroken. It's excruciating. And I feel you, and many others, we've all likely had a similar experience, and I'm sorry that happened. Hi, Eliana. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot for a child to cope with, Eliana. So wonderful. So intermittent reinforcement can really help explain all of this, especially the anxious attachment. And again, this can apply globally and especially in romantic relationships. So if you think about a slot machine, this is the best example. A slot machine, sometimes, rarely, you will win. That's it. That's intermittent reinforcement. If you translate that or transfer that idea into a relationship where rarely you would get validation or love, and most of the time not, it creates a very powerful bond. It creates an addiction. I mean, a gambling addiction is one of the hardest to break because of what happens in the brain, in the neural pathways, due to intermittent reinforcement. So if anybody can relate to, being anxiously attached in relationships, feeling crazy, if there's a push-pull dynamic, if somebody's available sometimes, that is due to intermittent reinforcement. Trish, I'm sorry to hear that your mother, you said, was not emotionally available, was an alcoholic. Yeah, so, I mean, that's a whole, this is part of that, and growing up in an unstable alcoholic home is, there's a lot more going on there as well. The walking on eggshells, the uncertainty, not knowing who you were going to come home to. And yes, Donna, this dynamic can keep you coming back for more, because in context of love relationships, how many of you have heard the term breadcrumbing? A breadcrumb is a breadcrumb. So if it's somebody you've been dating and they give you just enough to keep you hooked, and then there's the uncertainty. That's due to the intermittent reinforcement. That's due to this whole concept of, this anxious attachment style. Hi, Caro. Good to see you. So, Trish, this was your whole life. So, this is why this can be helpful. Again, as I said in the beginning, when we see these patterns, then they can stop running our lives. So, for any of you who were lucky enough to grow up in a secure, safe household, likely you are securely attached. Where is it? I have a note here. Okay. So, secure attachment. You are comfortable with closeness. You trust connection. That's a big one. How many of you don't trust connections of any kind? If you're securely attached, you can handle distance without panic. You can communicate your needs. So that's where, if you don't have that, that's where we want to go. Right? That's the ideal. To be comfortable with closeness, trust connection, can be comfortable with distance, and can speak up. Wonderful, Caro. And for those of you that had it, wonderful. That's great. Yeah, and some of us didn't, and that's okay. That's just how it is in life sometimes. So The anxious attachment style, those of us that have that, we are sensitive to shifts in connection. So as children, if we were not safe, we learn to monitor our environment for clues. How many of you can relate to that? You know, even looking at expressions on our parents' faces to try and read them. And so we're very sensitive if things change. Fearing distance or abandonment, because it could mean, how many of you had a parent or a caregiver like run away for a few days or leave or threaten leaving? I had that. So for a child, that's very destabilizing. Trish, yeah, that's wonderful. You are on the path of working on it. I mean, I think all of us, if we're here in Insight Timer and want to be in the live stream, we're open to learning and changing and growing. So yeah, Robina, Lynn, Donna. Yeah. So we seek reassurance, those of us with anxious attachment, and overanalyze signals. So the flip side of that is the avoidant attachment style. How many of you have heard of, and I know Trish already mentioned it, avoidant attachment? It's the flip side of anxious. So for an avoidant attachment, it was still unsafe and uncertain, in childhood. But there was like different buttons pressed to where there could have been an engulfment of the child by the caregiver, an over-reliance, like suffocation and unhealthy like the parent using the child to meet their emotional needs and things like that. Lynn, so yeah, you're familiar. The anxious, you're the anxious, they're the avoidant. Usually, not always, but more often than not, the woman or the feminine in the relationship is more prone to be anxious, although it's not a rule. And Robina, both. There is, I'm going to talk about that one next. So there is one, it's called disorganized attachment. So the avoidant is uncomfortable with vulnerability. They pull away when emotions come up. They prioritize being independent, and they suppress their relational needs. And this is where, in terms of romance, and it could be even friendship, if this dynamic comes up, where love bombing comes in. So how many of you know or don't know what love bombing is? And again, these are all like newer terms, newer meaning in the past, 15 years. But it's very classic in an avoidant relationship or like potential romantic relationship, where the avoidant, they come on very strong and they make big bold declarations, they engulf the other person, and then they pull away. And after, they win over the other person, they win over the anxiously attached person, then they're terrified of the closeness and the vulnerability, and then they pull away and their avoidant side is activated. It's very painful to be on the receiving end of that dynamic. Robina, Trish. Yeah. So, we get to heal ourselves. And part of that is learning to trust our signals, our own internal guidance. learning to pause, and we'll get to that. So the fourth style is disorganized. So that one wants closeness but fears it, and there's a push-pull dynamic, and connection feels confusing. So it could be mixed. You might be avoidant in some relationships or anxious in others, or even in the same relationship, depending on the dynamics, you might be one or the other. So we're focusing on anxious because for most of us, that's where we are. So, and I too, again, want to kind of broaden the frame to be for any relationships. And that would show up as uncertainty in connection. The uncertainty then leads to emotional destabilization. How many of you can relate to that? You know, with, it could be family, could be friends. It could even be in your yoga class, or if you go to the same yoga studio and maybe the teacher doesn't say hi. I mean, this can apply to everything. So when the anxiety is activated, we're going to overthink, scan for signals, seek reassurance to try and restore closeness, because we don't feel safe. It feels destabilizing and uncomfortable. Have you ever thought somebody's mad at you? And then there's just that uncomfortable feeling inside, and then the mind scans like, okay, what can I do? I need to reach out. I need to apologize, even though I don't think I did anything wrong. So lots of relating here. So whatever the dynamic is, you may replay conversations, overanalyze texts, or if it was a live conversation, overanalyze what was said, the way they said it. Hi Felice, welcome. Glad you're here. Or again, as I said, worrying somebody's upset, and just getting obsessed of like wanting to fix it so you can feel better. And that has nothing to do with the other person, by the way. So I want to slow down on that, because when this gets activated, there's this illusion that like the other person is involved somehow, or like we're caring about them. And not to say we might not, but mostly it's what's happening inside of us that's uncomfortable, that we just want it to go away and we want to feel better. And so we want to manipulate and control the situation around us so that we can feel the closeness again or the validation again. And then how many of you obsess? You just can't stop thinking about it and ruminate. So it's like the stability, like our inner stability, our emotional stability is tied to however that connection feels. And then when we get into the rumination, that is a coping mechanism where the mind is trying to solve something through thinking, and that will never work. We can't think our way through it or out of it. And then it just becomes obsession and overthinking. So, Trish, yes, control, control is fear, comes from fear, which makes sense. So we're not here to be like, oh, you guys know me, one of my core messages is always about, we're not wrong for how we feel. We're not here to, this isn't about like, oh my God, I'm so fucked up. No. But again, it's about noticing these patterns so that they no longer unconsciously run your lives. So we need to have, there needs to be awareness. So yeah, we're going to talk about breaking it. We're also going to, excuse me, draw cards as messages from Spirit. I'm going to draw a couple cards just to see what advice Spirit has for all of this. So yeah. And I would say, for those who want to know how to break it, the first step is being able to see it. I remember I was in a narcissistic abusive relationship years ago, and I didn't know. I didn't know about that. I mean, everybody's heard of narcissism, but this newer frame that's come out again in the past 10 or 15 years. I had no concept about that in a romantic relationship, and so I was unknowingly involved with a narcissist and didn't understand why I felt like I was insane and falling apart every day. It was one of the worst experiences of my life, which is partly why I'm doing this, because the topic of romantic relationships and, dysfunction within it is near and dear to my heart because of my own experiences. So I remember I saw a video on intermittent reinforcement in relationships, and I was like, oh my God, that explains so much. I didn't feel so alone or like there was something terribly wrong with me anymore. So having this knowledge and awareness is part of how to break the cycle and make the changes. And yeah, what if we learn this sort of thing in school? So, we've talked about how this anxious attachment style in romantic relationships can show up. In friendship, it can be, worrying that somebody's mad at you, analyzing if they don't, show up in the same way, or maybe they stop initiating, asking you to lunch or whatever, things like that. Family dynamics, of course, it shows up there as well. In work, how many of you want to please your boss or even your coworkers? Or maybe there's certain coworkers that, now that you have this language, that are like, oh wow, they're super avoidant, and for some reason you notice you really want them to like you, but you don't even think you really like them. How many can relate to that? And then, like I said, even at church or at your local yoga studio, the yoga teacher or the minister or the, people that are higher up in the organization. Are you sensitive to interactions with them and how they treat you? Trish chased all the men in your life. Yeah, again, starting to wake up to this awareness, I just really invite all of you to just be really gentle with yourself, because it could turn to making yourself wrong or blaming, shaming, and that we don't want to do that. And if that shows up, that's fine too. You can then bring loving compassion to yourself for that. So again, this all comes from core wounds, unsafe attachment in childhood with our primary caregivers, not being able to trust the connections that you had with those people. And for some of you, it might show up as feeling like you need to earn love, earn approval, earn acceptance. Some of you might feel like you're too much. So it's either I'm not enough or I'm too much, which boils down to I'm not enough. But how many of you feel like you're too much? Like you overshare, or you feel, like needy, or that your needs are too much and you can't express them. Yeah. So underneath the root of all of this is prioritizing keeping that attachment thread intact over trusting your own experience. So how many of you have been in a connection where you feel super uncomfortable? So for me, with that narcissist, I can, of course, when it happened, I didn't know. I was just having an experience. But it didn't take long, and reflecting back, hindsight is 2020, I realized, like, even the first time I met him, I felt this very unsettled, weird feeling inside of my body, like in my intuition and my energy, that I noticed, but of course I wrote it off. Now, this was, a long time ago. Things are very different now for me. But it was like, wow, that was my inner guidance. That was my intuition telling me something is off here. But yet, in really every time, like, it turns out he was engaged and he got married while we were seeing each other. And I didn't know until later, until it was already over. But because of the intermittent reinforcement, the narcissism, the attachment styles, me being the anxious, him being the avoidant, I prioritized keeping that connection intact by controlling, manipulating, chasing, being overly available to the breadcrumbs. I prioritize that over trusting my own inner experience and my own inner guidance. And that's something, again, that if you had this, you learned it in childhood. And back then, it was life or death, right? Because children must be cared for to survive. So that's why this all feels so deep. So many of you can relate. I'm sorry, Lynn, that you were sexually abused as a child. Thank you for sharing that. You're not alone in that. And it would make sense that you now feel uncomfortable with most men after that experience. Abuse of any kind, especially sexual, it affects us for our entire lives. So again, it's having the awareness, the knowledge, the wisdom to then make the changes and the shifts. Trish was in the same situation, abusive relationship. Yeah, I mean, so I invite all of you here, if you're relating to this, then this is part of the healing, and this is part of how you break it. You've got to start tuning inward into here, into your heart center, into your chest, into your heart chakra, like whatever you want to call this. And it's actually the physical heart. The physical heart has more neurons than the brain. The heart is a highly attuned, sensitive, complex instrument that guides us when we choose to listen. Oh my gosh, Donna, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that happened to you. That is terrible. I'm so sorry. And thank you, everyone, for your courage to be vulnerable in our space. Thank you. Because when we speak our vulnerability, especially in these group spaces, you know, you're speaking for those who aren't speaking. So whatever the dynamic is, instead of looking outward, so this is part of the healing and the shifting, is instead of looking at what can I do to fix this, right? How many of you can relate to having claws and wanting to have claws into a connection, a relationship? Instead of going into fix-it mode about it, first waking up and being like, oh, here it is. Here's the moment where I feel that pull. I feel that dis-ease. And whatever the relationship dynamic is. And coming back. Breathing. Okay. What do I feel? What do I need? You know, validating yourself. It's okay that I feel this way. It makes sense that I want to do something to fix this, or to bridge the connection, or take some action out of anxiety. It's okay. And really, you know, it's always going to come back to, in my view, inner child healing. Because honestly, that's the part that's running the show here, right? I mean, this all comes from childhood. So you could even look at it as your inner child is, you know, texting the person, or your inner child is the one that's upset and wanting to do all of these things. And we don't want a child to be running our lives. But that's what happens when that wound is activated. The wounded child takes over, because that's what it's hitting. And children are immature. That's just the nature of a child. And so then that makes this whole adult part of us go offline. And that wounded child energy takes over and will do sometimes crazy things. How many of you have done things you're embarrassed about in the name of wanting to fix a relationship connection? Yeah. So it's always about coming back into that. And, you know, the mind has a propensity to want some bright and shiny 5-step quick fix solution, and sorry, that's just not how this works. And it doesn't mean that it can't happen, and it can't happen fairly quickly. And you want to look at how long has this been going on. It's a pattern that now that you're being armed with information, you can choose differently. So you don't want that wounded child running your life. That's what it means, like the phrase, if anybody's heard the phrase adult child, that's what it means. You know, many of us are, you know, children running around in adult bodies because these parts get triggered and take over. And so that's why the path to healing is reparenting. And, you know, you all have everything you need to do that, as far as the awareness. And I help people with this, so, you know, now's a good time to mention that. If you want support around healing these patterns, and you haven't had a gifted session with me before, remember that I do offer my visioning process, where we can look at these patterns, look at where you're stuck, look at the consequences. How has all of this impacted you? And I offer a very powerful, gifted process for those here in the community. If you've not had that before with me, send me a message. Yay, awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Hi, Jed. Sure. So you can send me a private message here through Insight Timer. In my teacher profile is a link to everywhere you can find me. You can search my name online. I think I come up first for myself. Natalie M. Speakman, Facebook, Instagram, website, all that. YouTube, I'm double live streaming this right now on YouTube. So if you want to revisit this, all my live stream replays are on YouTube. So follow, if you have that inner guidance, you know, a time to start trusting it a little bit more. Your intuition will not steer you wrong. You know, nobody is coming to save you, and it's not going to be that next person. And the thing is, you will keep attracting this same kind of dynamic until you heal it within yourself, because that's how the universe works. It is conspiring to help you by giving you these situations, because it's touching the wound that's ready and wanting to be healed, that can be healed by the light of your awareness. And yeah, it's like nobody can do this for you, and you can't do it alone. So it's a paradox, because we need others, and we need community, and we need people. That's why the 12-step programs work so well, because of the community. And Insight Timer, we have a wonderful community here. And see, the wounded child is a victim, and they are a true victim, of course. But that energy then takes over, and then adults stay in that victimhood. And then they feel powerless, Then there's, blaming everyone else. We've got to be responsible for our own healing. We've got to take that wounded child by the hand and tell them, I'm here for you, I'm not going anywhere, and I am going to take care of you now. So, anybody have any questions or comments? Let's see, I'm going to draw a couple Light Seers cards and just see what Spirit has for this topic as a whole for everybody here. Please don't forget to follow me here, as I said, and all of the places I mentioned that I am. It helps support me in growing. And if you feel that heart's call to reach out one-on-one, please do so. Wonderful, Trish. Jed. Yes. And I'm going to be having some further live streams on similar topics. We're going to talk about trauma bonds soon. And we're going to be talking about toxic shame. So, this book, Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw, as you can tell, it's a very old 80s book, or maybe 90s. Yeah, so if you can relate to this conversation, likely you have toxic shame, because that's just the nature of it. And John Bradshaw pioneered inner child healing. Awesome, Donna. So I've got 2 cards here. I want to get one more. Okay, so of course, I always say the book is Healing the Shame That Binds You. And I played, how many of you were here for the Inner Child one-eyed live stream? And I played that meditation at the end that was so powerful. That was from John Bradshaw, his Inner Child Healing series he did on PBS in the 80s or 90s. And so that's him. And if you want that, or you want a copy of the playlist on YouTube where that is. And he also has like a 3.5-hour full workshop on there, if you want to go through that. And I would say, and he gives a disclaimer, like, you get to discern for yourself if you can handle looking at that, like, without guidance, because it brings up, all your childhood stuff. Jed wants it to be sacred femininity and masculinity within and without, but it ends up being competition, conflict, and lack of compassion. That's very aware of you, and what a wonderful intention to have. I acknowledge what you want. And yeah, sounds like the pattern is different. Yeah. Yes, Trish, all of my replays are over there. And if you want the link, just send me a message. I'll send you exactly the one. So, as I said, you can't make this shit up. Look at the card that pulled, 5 of Pentacles. How many of you can relate to this image in regards to everything that we've been talking about? I mean, there really is no better card than this to describe everything, like the suffering and the dynamics and the pain. So there's a door with a key, or a lock and a key, and then this person just crumpled on the ground in pain. They feel abandoned, they feel rejected, they feel despondent, they feel hopeless, they feel left out in the cold. The actual the original Five of Pentacles image, I think it's snowing, and the person is like wounded physically. But see, the thing is, look, the key to the lock is on the outside of the door. She can go get that key. She is just lost in her suffering and either doesn't see it or is comfortable in their uncomfortable comfort zone. Yeah. I mean, the body is hunched and they're alone. So this is the wounded child. And this is the energy that gets activated when the person doesn't text back, right? Or, they pull away, or you feel like they're mad at you, or they do get mad. So we just got this last week. So this is a strong message from Spirit, again, to remind you with the Magician that you have everything you need. You have all of the tools. You are a creator. You are God. You are infinite. You are the creator of your reality. And you can create something different when you remember the truth of who you are, when you go from here to here, and that you will have a death and a rebirth. The death card. The card is an amazing card of beautiful transformation. So this is on the other side. This is what's possible for you. And again, what's cool about this card is, with this image, you have everything inside of you. Look at the beautiful light and stars and trees, the mystical. It's all within you. So this is what's possible, and it's so close. It's right here. I'm going to read the affirmation for the death card. And then we will begin to close. This is what's called the Light Seers deck, Lynn. And of course, you can't make this shit up. So the affirmation for this card is, I let go of the past and add energy to new beginnings. I let go of the past and add energy to new beginnings. Yeah. So letting go of the past, parenting this beautiful child. And again, if you want support on your healing journey with this, or anything that feels like what you're coming up against, where you might feel stuck, please send me a message. As I said, I offer as a gift to the community my visioning process. It's a very powerful coaching conversation where to help you move into these energies. Let me put up follow card. So if you haven't, please give me a follow. It helps me to help others even more, helps me to grow my channel here. If you care to, if you feel called, you can give a donation. It's always welcomed. And you can donate through the app anytime or other ways, but the card is there. So, Robina, I let go of the past and add energy to new beginnings. And my next live stream is one of my top favorite topics, the end of self-gaslighting, which I did reference a little bit today as far as like not using all of this knowledge to then make yourself wrong and beat yourself up. So we're going to dive more deeply into the end of self-gaslighting, which to me, I mean, that is the healing of the child, because as children we were gaslit all the time. Stop crying. Boys don't cry. You know, girls, you're a crybaby. You're too happy. Why are you laughing all the time? All of those things then formed that pattern within ourselves that we then do it to ourselves. Thank you, Jed. These topics are just so close to my heart for myself in my own journey, and I'm very passionate about all of this. So yes, exactly, Robina. And so even the attachment styles, come into that. So we will be having more of these sorts of topics because this is where I'm at on my own healing journey. That's how it always is, right? We teach what we most need to learn. So I will see you all March 20th at 3 p.m. Eastern. And I do go live every week at this time. So you can join my group, Natalie's Healing Circle, here in Insight Timer to stay connected in between live streams. You're welcome, Robina. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful Sunday wherever you are in the world. Much love and namaste. Thank you. You're welcome. Bye-bye.